A lot of people are asking questions about whether or not Kenny Pickett made it so that he sat himself against the Seattle Seahawks. We'll talk about that drama with Alan Saunders, who has some reporting to reveal here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. All that and more, as well as our Week 17 Stars and Skulls grades here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. I'm your host, Chris Carter. Let's get into it.
You are Locked On Steelers, your daily Pittsburgh Steelers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome to the Locked On Steelers podcast. I'm your host, Chris Carter, bringing you your daily dose of all things in the Pittsburgh Steelers. As always, you can find this show on your favorite podcasting apps and on YouTube. Like this video if you enjoyed. Subscribe to this YouTube channel to get all of your daily Monday through Friday episodes, as well as our bonus content. We thank you for making us your first listen every day because we're your team every day. And today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook, the #1 sportsbook in America. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets back by winning any $5 money line bet. That's $150 in bonus bets if your team wins. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started. As I said before, we're joined by Alan Saunders of SteelersNow.com. He just got back from Seattle. I was going to say, where's your finger points, man? Come on.
And boy, are my arms tired. That's what, the finger point. I was just, it was a little sore from flying back. So I had to get it,
all the flapping. Okay, Alan, let's get into the big discussion that was all over Pittsburgh on New Year's Day. It's like people didn't have anything else better to do. We had great college football playoff games, and yet here we are talking about this. But the rumor that is swirled around the city was the potential story that Kenny Pickett refused to be what some say the number 2 quarterback to Mason Rudolph in going into the game, and that he made himself inactive, and that this was and then that's why he was not available for that game. There have been people who have supported the story and said they believe it. There's people who have said that they don't believe it. There's people that said it's complete bupkis. You guys had your own reporting. Can you tell us what you all at SteelersNow.com were able to reveal from your sources?
Yeah, so we talked to a lot of people, and this was really a joint effort between myself and Derek Bell, who did most of the legwork, and Nick Fairballs. I was literally on the plane as this was happening this afternoon. So shout out to those guys for holding the fort down with some big news here. Yeah, I mean, what we were able to learn was, I think what a lot of other people learned, that part of the reason that Kenny Pickett was not dressed for that game was that because he simply didn't want to be. And I think when you look at the situation objectively, from the beginning, before, you kind of take any reporting anyone's done into consideration, right? There were only so many options that made any sense. What was he not healthy enough to dress? Did he not want to dress? Maybe that he was being punished for something, like that feels like a reach, but really, I mean, there are only so many options, right? There's no team upside to not dressing Kenny Pickett as the emergency quarterback. You don't get to use that spot for anybody else. And even if, as long as he's able to be an upgrade over whichever other position player, I've been using Connor Hayward just because he's the guy who most recently threw a pass. But like, as long as however healthy Kenny Pickett was on Sunday, that was better than Connor Hayward taking snaps at quarterback, then that would have been better for the team. And so there's no team reason to do it, right? No tactical team reason to do it.
The team
anyway.
wouldn't just, yeah.
So is it discipline? Is it a request, or was he not healthy? Now, it was reported during the week. I believe maybe it was on Thursday. Jerry Dulac of the Post-Gazette reported that Kenny Pickett was healthy. Dan Kovacevic of DK Pittsburgh Sports reported today that Kenny Pickett was cleared on Thursday. And Mike Tomlin said in his press conference today that Kenny Pickett was cleared at some point before the game. So, okay, cross that one off the list. I believe 2 veteran reporters in this town and the word of the head coach when they're all in alignment. So Kenny was healthy enough to play in the game, and he didn't. Well, why? Okay, there's only so many other reasons. And so I think that's what sort of set the alarm bells off for me, that this, I guess you could call it, started as a rumor going around, probably had some legs. And so we got into seeing what parts of it that we could confirm, and we were able to confirm Basically, Mike Tomlin made the decision to go with Mitch Trubisky as the backup quarterback and Mason Rudolph as the starter at the end of the week based on the work they had done this week. That left Kenny Pickett in a number 3 position where he would have been that emergency guy. And what we've been told is that the reason that he didn't dress was some pushback from Kenny. I don't know why. I'm not going to end the business of reading people's minds. And unless I talked to him, it would be really hard for me to tell you that. But that's what we were told by some pretty good sources that have been very reliable for us in the past. And so that's what we've gone with. And I think we have a version of events here that, to me anyway, makes a lot of sense with the facts that are surrounding the situation.
I think that the thing is here is making sense of it, because I've heard the rumor about, that Kenny Pickett was told he could be number 2, and that he turned that down because he refused to. I've also heard the rumor that that's completely nonsense. And I say rumors because these are unverified. Until Kenny Pickett says something, until Mike Tomlin, if it's not coming from someone who actually made the decision there, to me, that is still a rumor at this point. So we're talking about, potentials and third person or fourth person in this discussion. But I tend to, whenever I talk about this, and I talked about this with you before the show began, I always look for a middle ground when I hear 2 extremes on different positions here. And one extreme is that he refused to be the second quarterback, and he was livid that Mason Rudolph was the starter, and that's why he didn't play, because he refused to take that, as he took it as a dishonor. Another one was that never happened. He was totally fine with it, and it was and he was just inactive because the team said so. And I'm like, okay, whether or not you believe one of those, I feel like there's a middle ground here, and I think your middle ground of maybe the third string quarterback makes a little bit of a difference there, because also you look at the Steelers situation, and it is something like it's not nothing that's if that's true, that's what his decision that he made, that he would sit out even as the third string quarterback. I still feel like that's a very different tone than, hey, we're going to need you as the number 2 guy just in case Mason has a bad day, and you're going to be who we call up. But if he's told he's the number 3 guy, that's interesting. But still, say that the day came where both Mason got hurt and Mitch got hurt, and they had no other options, and he wasn't available. That could have killed the Steelers season right then and there. So I think there's something to that there. My big thing here is I don't buy into not that I don't buy into. I want to see how Kenny Pickett handles it this week. What does he say? Because he spoke to us last week in front of a backdrop, and here's my thing. If he was so dishonored by this decision to be sat down for the number 2 quarterback, again, not your reporting, but the other rumor that's been swirling around here, if he was so dishonored by that, he will not, if that's the case, he will not be behind Mason Rudolph. We know Mason Rudolph's the starter this week. He will again be inactive if that story is true, because then he wouldn't because why would he do anything different if something else changed? And that's where I tend to believe your sense of reporting here, that there's it's not exactly the way that people have portrayed it.
Well, look, if Kenny Pickett's not willing to be the backup quarterback to Mason Rudolph, then the next thing that's coming is a trade request. I mean, there's no middle ground here. You can't just do that. But the thing that strikes me is that I was there in Seattle. I didn't feel that level of negativity. I saw guys joking around, being jovial. I saw, Kenny Pickett in the locker room, and a very random Wayne Gretzky appearance that for some reason happened. I don't know, but they were hugging it out, and I don't know. It did not feel like there was animus, right? And Mike Tomlin, has not revealed this. So, is he covering for him? Like, if Mike Tomlin was real upset that Kenny Pickett had done this, then he would have just said that he had done this, and then Kenny would be off the team like that. Like, it doesn't feel like the Steelers are just foaming at the mouth about the way this went down. I honestly feel a little bit bad that, I think we've kind of made too big a deal of it. I don't get the sense, and this is another thing that Dejan Kovacevic reported, that nobody's mad about this, and I don't have a source to confirm that. I would have if I did, but that kind of is what I'm feeling, in the vibes of the environment right now as well.
And here's the thing. I feel like we would have heard something by now. I think there would have been some obvious tones that were in front of everybody that there were some problems. And like you said, if you were around the team, I wasn't there. I was sitting here in Pittsburgh doing all the podcasts that evening and trying to enjoy some champagne before the ball dropped. But in all seriousness, if there was some noise, I feel like it would have been very obvious to a lot of people, and that would have been reported. That wouldn't have been speculation. That wouldn't have been rumors. That would have been like, oh no, people aren't happy with something in the locker room right now, and you're not seeing right now. And you could say, hey, maybe winning such a big game in such a big way, maybe that will quiet that any frustrations down. But still, if as you're saying, if the tone of that, including Kenny Pickett being in the locker room and everything else with the trip there, wasn't an issue. I tend to look at it and think I don't think it's going to be an issue for the Steelers moving forward, at least until we hear something else.
I mean, I guess Mike Tomlin, look, let's be honest. He's not always honest. Like not everything we get in those press conferences is truthful, but like if there was big problems, why would he say leave the door open to Kenny Pickett being the backup this week? Like that would just not be a possibility. Right. And if he's acknowledging that Rudolph is his starting quarterback, I don't think he's going to go through the trouble of making Baltimore sweat it out to see who's going to be the backup. Like that doesn't track to me either. It seems like we should take him at his word that there's a chance that Kenny Pickett plays this week. And I have a very hard time seeing him just like flat out rejecting the backup quarterback job last week and then it being offered again. That does not feel like a thing that happens in this sport.
I'm right with you. We got to talk a little bit more about this and about Mason Rudolph, as well as get to our stars and skulls grades here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. Chris Carter, Alan Saunders, stick with us. We still have a lot to discuss. But first, I want to remind you this show is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook, the #1 sportsbook in America. Get ready for the NFL playoffs with all the incredible offers from FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Right now, new customers who go to FanDuel right now can get $150 back in bonus bets if they hit on any $5 money line bet. That's right. You find a game that you like. Say you really like the Steelers to beat the Ravens this weekend and make it and fight their way to the playoffs. You put $5 on that and you hit. You get $150 back in bonus bets on FanDuel, the #1 sportsbook in America. If you've been thinking about joining FanDuel, there's no better time to get in on the action. It's an app that you can download right to your phone, and it's easy to bet on anything from spreads to player props to over-unders and so much more. Get it on FanDuel today. And when you do, go to FanDuel.com/lockedon. That's FanDuel.com/lockedon so that you can take advantage of the $5 moneyline bet that can get you $150 in bonus bets by going to FanDuel.com/lockedon. FanDuel, an official partner of the NFL. Back here on the Locked On Steelers podcast, I'm your host, Chris Carter, here with Alan Saunders of SteelersNow.com. Alan, let's talk real quick here about the future with Mason Rudolph. He's the starter this week. It perceives to me that he's going to be the starter until the wheels fall off, like until he has the terrible moment or not even the terrible moment, the terrible half even of football where he just looks completely inept. He's not coming out of the starting position, nor should he if the Steelers keep putting up 30 plus points. And you and I, talked about this on the show last week, and you and I had the opinion if Kenny Pickett was 100% ready to go by the time it was like Wednesday or so, like when they had time to actually practice for the week, he could be the starter. I think that even as we speak right now, if Kenny Pickett is 100% to play, just to practice from Tuesday on, it won't matter. Mason Rudolph is going to be that guy. And I also don't think that's a problem right now for the Steelers because they want to win to get into the playoffs, and Mason Rudolph's been giving them the best chance for them to do it. Do you see an issue here?
I mean, look, I think it's a long-term issue, right? Because you don't have a long-term option, right? I mean, Mason Rudolph's 28 years old, so he's not really a long-term option, period, but he's also out of contract. I mean, I don't know. I don't think anybody thinks that he's the future, right? I mean, you're just basically playing for as long as you can play this year and figuring out the quarterback position in the offseason. Mike Tomlin basically not in that answer to that question, but he said those words a couple times today, right? He said when someone asked him who's the better quarterback right now, Mason Rudolph or Kenny Pickett, hey, that's an offseason question. He said, we're taking things 1 week at a time right now. And so I get it. I get it from a tactical perspective. I think big picture, it basically adds up to a lost season, right? I mean, that's where we're at right now.
And I think that's where some people are wondering is what about the development of Kenny Pickett if he's going to be your franchise quarterback? And we don't know if that's going to happen. And that was one of the things we talked about going into this season beyond any playoff hopes or any division hopes or whatever. Your goal was to see if Kenny Pickett is your franchise guy. And you can't say that he is. And I'm not sure if we have learned officially that he's ain't. I know some people believe that he's absolutely that he's not, and there's no chance that he could be. I'm of the opinion that I think that's still something that the Steelers could learn. But I'm also of the opinion that even though they haven't officially learned that yet, that should not stop them from drafting a quarterback if they see the right guy fall to their position.
Well, I think the Steelers' actions have told us that they don't feel like they're done with Kenny Pickett, right? I mean,
right.
I think I said this last week here, but look, when things were going badly with the offense, they fired the coordinator. They didn't bench the quarterback, right? That's a strong sign that they felt like there was still something there to unlock with Kenny Pickett, and they've gotten 5.5 quarters of football with Kenny Pickett on the other side of that. I'm sure that they intended to see more of that when they made that move, right, than they've seen so far. So that's the first thing. The second thing is, look, I think this process of Pickett getting injured and then going to Trubisky and now going to Rudolph, they've been fairly protective towards Pickett throughout this process. It took 2 weeks of really good play by Mason Rudolph from Mike Tomlin and basically, all reasonable time frame of injury recovery to run out before Mike Tomlin basically he waited to the last possible minute to acknowledge, yes, Kenny is healthy, and yes, we're starting Mason Rudolph anyway. He waited until he could not put off that sentence for another day, basically, to say it. And so, the actions tell me that there is still a care and a desire to continue to see this player in Kenny Pickett at quarterback more than what they've seen so far. But I don't know how you can go into the offseason with anything approaching the status quo at that position. You're probably going to have a new offensive coordinator. I assume they're going to want, an opinion in the matter. Maybe they won't even want to work with Kenny Pickett. I don't know. But I think there's it's hard to see that far into the future given the amount of unknowns here, but I think there's a very high likelihood that the Steelers are in the quarterback market in a significant way, whether that's trade, free agency, or the draft this offseason.
I'm right with you. I think there is a high likelihood. I also think there's a chance that they find a way to re-sign Mason Rudolph if he doesn't find somewhere else. Because of especially if this run continues right now, because here's the reality. If they beat the Ravens on Saturday and then one of the two things happen that they need to have happen, and they're in the playoffs, they get a playoff win with Mason Rudolph. This town's gonna. I'm scared to see what Pittsburgh will even be like in that moment, because this town will be on fire with just I thought I understood. I thought I remembered what it was like to be around Pittsburgh when there wasn't a franchise quarterback set in that everyone knew he was the guy. Because I remembered my childhood: Cordell Stewart, Kent Graham, Tommy Maddox, Mike Tomczak. I thought I remembered that. Working in it is a whole different level, Alan.
The backup quarterback has always been the most popular guy in Pittsburgh, and there was a little time period there where it wasn't, and now I feel like we're making up for lost time, right? And I just would caution Steelers fans to not make too much out of whatever Rudolph does or doesn't do in these next couple of weeks. Jake Browning's been pretty good for the Bengals this year. I don't think they think much of him in the future. Joe Flacco's been spectacular for the Browns this year. I will guarantee that he is not going to be on their roster next fall, and that Deshaun Watson is going to be their starting quarterback again. Now, Burrow and Watson are guys with longer track records of success than Pickett has. I'm just saying those teams are not going to be fooled by some solid performances by guys that came out of nowhere and turn that into thinking that they're long-term options. And I don't think the Steelers should, and I don't think they will either, even if Rudolph finishes out a pretty decent season here.
I hear you on that. Real quick before we go, it's time. We do have to get to our stars and skulls here before we get into this. And I'm going to start with the skulls. I didn't have too many skulls when I went back and did my all 22 review of this. There were some guys who I felt that they could have been skull worthy, but then they had some plays to make up for it, so they got neutral grade. So I only gave out 4 skulls in this game. Also, here's the quick rubric for those who remember: 1 to 3 stars, good to elite, 1 to 3 skulls, bad to terrible. You guys know the drill here if you've been here this long. Real quick, we didn't have any 3 skulls or 2 skulls. We did have some 1 skulls. I did have Mark Robinson. Actually, I meant to take Michael Walker off of there. But Mark Robinson, Presley Harvin, Miles Killebrew, simply because I felt like there were times over the middle that they were contributing to the problems with stopping the run early and some of the problems they had over the middle. I thought about putting Eric Rowe here, but I also saw some other plays that he made, so I gave him a neutral grade. Might have given him a star because he also had a breakup. But all that being said, these are just the guys that I just put skulls on here. But there are a lot of star-worthy players here. Alan, was there anyone that stood out to you that needs to get a skull that I missed out on here?
No, I don't think so. And full disclosure, I haven't had a chance to watch this game back yet. I was planning on doing that on my flight today, and then
all this,
it's the world of a reporter. So no, I didn't notice any other big time negative plays. I thought this was in general a pretty well played game by the Steelers, especially the Steelers that we have a real expectation for being. Well, the one guy I think I could maybe put in that group would be Joey Porter Jr. I thought he kind of got cooked a little bit by DK Metcalf in a way that we haven't seen from him. Now that's a very difficult assignment, but I thought that was probably his toughest game of the year.
I thought so too. But I'm going to talk about him in the next segment here because I have an interest because I saw that early on, but I thought there was something else that tipped me why I gave him a different grade than giving him a skull. We'll talk about that here in the Locked On Steelers podcast. Chris Carter, Alan Saunders, stick with us. We got a lot to discuss. But first, I want to remind you, this show is brought to you by PrizePicks. PrizePicks is daily fantasy sports made easy. It's the best daily fantasy sports platform in North America because they're the easiest and most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports because it's just you against the numbers. You're not competing against thousands of other players. You're not trying to assemble the greatest lineup of all time that just happens to hit all the right hits that all the pros and the sharks don't hit. You're just saying, hey, I see 2 to 6 players in this weekend, and I'm just saying I'm looking at their player projection numbers, and I'm guessing more or less than their projection numbers. You're not trying to beat other people. You're just trying to beat PrizePicks. And PrizePicks being the fun new daily fantasy game, it's the one that everyone needs to start playing right now. You can also download an app right to your phone and start playing today. And with basketball season here, you can also pick up on new games like the Specials League, where you can pick combo projections between different sports. If Travis Kelce and LeBron James are projected to combine for 3-pointers and receptions around 10.5, you just say more or less than that number, and if they hit over, you watch your winnings roll, and if they don't, you can play again. But that's the whole point with PrizePicks. They have a lot of different ways for you to win. Download the PrizePicks app today, or go to PrizePicks.com right now, and you can sign up to play daily fantasy sports. And if you go to PrizePicks.com, go specifically to PrizePicks.com/LockedOnNFL and use code LockedOnNFL for a first deposit match up to $100. That's PrizePicks.com/LockedOnNFL. Use code LockedOnNFL for a first deposit match up to $100. We're back here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. Chris Carter, Alan Saunders breaking things down. It's time to continue with our grades. We got lots of stars. If I call the graveyard when we have lots of skulls, we've had quite a few graveyards this season. I guess I got to call it a starry night. I'm trying to figure out a cool way to put that. We have
Cosmos.
That's why we bring you on this show.
Galaxy, Cosmos.
Cosmos sounds cooler. I like Cosmos.
It's very Neil deGrasse Tyson, who I'm a big fan of. So I feel like he would call it a Cosmos.
Absolutely, a Cosmos. I like that entirely. Well, we got a Cosmos here, especially with the 1-star grades. I gave quite a few 1-star grades, and I'll put here before we get to all of them. Joey Porter Jr. is on this list. I was going to give him a skull, Alan, but in the red zone, late in the game, Geno Smith said, I'm going to DK Metcalf. And one play, Joey Porter Jr. broke it up. The other play, he pinned Metcalf to out of bounds, and it did hit Metcalf's hands. But if he had hauled it in and held onto the ball, it wouldn't have been a catch. That's why I gave him a star, because in the big part of the game, he showed up in a big way, and that was a big reason why the Steelers held them to a field goal and were able to win that game, in my opinion, going into the end.
It was a great sequence. I just thought that it was too much early. And look, I will say this, and I said this on my podcast today also, Steelers Afternoon Drive with me and Zachary Smith. Not too many times are you going to hand a young cornerback, or really any cornerback, an assignment like, hey, just go take care of DK Metcalf. We got you. You got this. Go get him, Tiger. But because the Steelers did that, 2 catches total for Tyler Lockett and Jackson Smith and Jigba. One of them on a play where Joey Porter Jr. was hurt on the sideline. So they gave him a tough job, and it was tough sometimes, but it was also good for the team. So I can see it, but he hasn't been beaten like that much this year, and I thought it was eye-catching, certainly.
Absolutely. My other 1-star grades, because we got a lot to give out here. Nick Herbig, Miles Jack, Shannon Sullivan, Mason Cole, Pat Freiermuth, Joey Porter Jr., Keanu Benton, Levi Wallace, Darnell Washington, Allen Robinson, TJ Watt, Chris Boswell, Alex Highsmith, Montravius Adams, Marcus Golden. Now, for those who might be wondering, why doesn't Nick Herbig get a bigger grade? Because he made maybe the biggest play of the game. He was only in for 2 plays. And I just, it's not a slight to him. It's a great play. But again, like the grading scale, as we talk about, if you made a good play, or a great play, like it's kind of like, if that's all you did, I can only give you 1 star for it. But it was a very big 1 star. I will say that. That's not to diminish Herbig, what he did there. But I'll also say, even though Highsmith and Watt didn't get didn't get a sack, didn't get a whole lot of tackles. Watt, I think, had 7 pressures, and Highsmith had 6. When I went back and I looked at the charting here, in fact, let me look at it right now. No, Highsmith had 7, Watt had 6, and this is one of those plays where I'm not going to say that these guys were elite in this game, but they were disruptive, and Geno Smith did a great job not getting into too many sacks, but they forced him to move, and they forced him to have to make some plays, and that's why I gave them 1-star grades, because I did feel like they impacted the game at least enough there.
Yeah, I felt that I was lacking some impact from those guys, but I also thought the Steelers' defensive game plan was just very conservative. It was a lot of 4-man rushes. It was a lot of obviously 4-man rushes, where a veteran guy like Geno Smith could set his protection just the way he wanted it because he knew who was coming from where. I also thought the Seahawks got away with a few holds.
Just a couple. Just a couple.
Here's where I'll make an argument against Watt and Highsmith. Started the game without 1 tackle, lost the second one in the second quarter. I have an expectation of guys that are Pro Bowl caliber players to beat up on backups and then get home. I'm not saying they didn't get pressure, but I think I have an expectation of those guys in the sack. And when Nick Herbig plays 2 plays and he gets home on 1 of them, I then feel like maybe those guys should have been getting home a little bit more than they did.
I hear you. But again, that's why I didn't give them 2 or 3 skull grades for their pressures. I gave them just 1 stars because they were disruptive, but they weren't the biggest playmakers. I gave Mason Cole a star because I felt like he did a good job sealing things off, but man, his snapping problems are just, they're too much right now. I feel like they got to get better. Pat Freiermuth, I thought, blocked well, on some key plays. It was funny hearing Najee Harris's commentary about him, about how he's trying to give credit. Like, you see what I pushed you?
His run blocking has gotten a lot better over the course of the season, especially since he's come back from the injury. I feel like he's been solid.
Absolutely. Moving on to our 2-star grades here. I gave them to James Daniels, Mason Rudolph, Dan Moore Jr., who actually I thought might have had his best game of the season, Deontay Johnson, and Patrick Peterson. Dan Moore getting to the second level, having some key blocks and some key points there. I gave him credit for that. James Daniels, I thought run blocking, very good. Pass blocking, not as good, but still got the job done enough there. Deontay Johnson made some really big plays in this game, and also had that onside kick recovery that was really important to make sure the Steelers had the ball at the end of the game. Patrick Peterson still won't be targeted for whatever reason. No teams are not, like, I would think, like, I'd be going after the old guy who's playing safety back there. Teams aren't doing it, and I think that's a testament to him always being in position and forcing teams to go in other directions there. And Mason Rudolph, if he had thrown a touchdown, I'd give him a 3-star grade, because otherwise I thought he was very good. There were a couple plays I thought he missed, like on the sack he took when the first field goal drive of the game, he had Jaylen Warren wide open, like right away, probably would have been a touchdown. But like, I'm not holding that against him. 2-star grade. He played very efficient and did what he was supposed to do, and he should keep. And he, again, that's why I think he should be starting, continuing, because he's doing his job.
How about this one? Dan Moore was mostly responsible for Boye Mafe, who's the leading sack man over there on that Seattle team, a young player that I've been really excited about.
I loved him coming out of college.
I think he's one of the best young edge rushers in the league. 3 hurries, no sacks, no quarterback hits. That's and on top of that, the best run blocking we've seen. If Dan Moore had been playing like he played on Sunday all year, we would not be talking about the Steelers needing a tackle in the draft. That was far and away his best game.
I agree. He played very well, and I think that was a big boost to what the Steelers needed there. Let's move on to the 3-star grades here. I got Isaac Seumalo, Najee Harris, Jaylen Warren, George Pickens, Broderick Jones. I felt Broderick Jones, this was the most demonstrative of like him being a pure mauler. Like, I am going to crush your soul type of blocking. And I was just like, oh my goodness, on some of his blocks, that he was just moving people and just being that bully the Steelers need on the offensive line. Also thought Seumalo was doing his doggone thing in the run blocking, and he was probably the Steelers' best pass blocker in this game as far as protecting his gaps. So I gave them the credits. I had to give 3 stars to both Jaylen Warren and Najee Harris. They were phenomenal in this game. And George Pickens, another 137 yards, and that ridiculous catch that he made on 3rd down. I couldn't not give it to him for his performance as well. Am I rating anyone too high, or am I missing any 3 stars here, Alan?
No, I feel good about this list. George Pickens is playing really well. And Najee Harris and Jaylen Warren. I mean, look, I know the whole fan base wants to talk about the quarterback situation. Man, how about these running backs? I cannot ever remember having 2 Steelers running backs that are this good, that run this hard, that play together the way these 2 do in a long time. It's really fun. I'm excited to watch angry runs because I think it's just going to be all Steelers. There was some heat coming out of those 2, man. What an awesome game.
They played phenomenally. And I think that, and I said this on the Monday show, I think that kind of production from the run game and seeing that kind of aggression from those guys, if that can be what the Steelers offense will be for the next few years, they're going to be a problem, whoever's at quarterback. And again, like, Mason Rudolph deserves a ton of credit. He did a lot of great things in this game. He saw the field. He didn't panic. Made a great throw to George Pickens on that play that we were talking about where Pickens plucked it. But if Najee Harris and Jaylen Warren are running downhill, delivering stiff arms, moving people, and just pushing piles forward and getting plays like that. And again, not every defense is going to be the Bengals and the Seahawks. They're 2 of the worst run defenses in the league. But if they're able to punish teams like that, it'll make a lot of those games that the Steelers are supposed to win more winnable, because they'll be able to lean on those guys to do it, and maybe even make them the number 1 running back tandem in the NFL.
I can see it. And look, if they get that kind of offensive line performance and they get that kind of running back performance every game, it does not matter who plays quarterback. They're going to be really good.
Absolutely. We'll have a lot more to discuss here on your Pittsburgh Steelers here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. He's Alan Saunders. I'm Chris Carter. Alan, thanks so much for joining us. Let people know they can find you, follow you, and get more of your work.
At @Saunders_PGH on Twitter, at PGH Steelers Now, SteelersNow.com is where all the words live. And the Steelers Afternoon Drive podcast with me and Zachary Smith on YouTube or wherever you find your podcasts.
Absolutely. Get me back on there. But
schedule's been rough, man. Holidays, and it's going to happen.
I know.
We'll get there.
Trust me, I know. My schedule's crazy. Today, because this is the Tuesday episode, I gotta be at Steelers practice and then cover and then do a podcast and then do Pitt basketball against the number 9 team in the country. So I'm gonna have a busy Tuesday as well. But we'll definitely make it happen at some point. He's Alan Saunders. I'm Chris Carter. Thanks so much for watching the Locked On Steelers podcast or listening to us. Whether you watch this on YouTube, like this channel, subscribe to this channel to get all of our daily episodes that we come out Monday through Friday. Or you listen on your favorite podcasting app that you can download right to your phone. We appreciate all of our listeners. We're your team your team every day here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. Back more tomorrow on talking about your Pittsburgh Steelers here on the Locked On Steelers podcast.